Welcome to part 3 of the University of Windsor Writing Support Desk's workshop on transitions. In part 1, we talked about types of transitions. In part 2, we looked at the functions of transitions. And in part 3, we're going to look at alternatives to using transition words and phrases to still show connections between our ideas. Alternatives to transitions that we'll be examining today include repetition, which we'll see to be more common in speeches to create a sort of chorus effect. So this is a rhetorical strategy that you'll see sometimes used by politicians in order to make a point in speeches. Another alternative would be to use pronouns to call back to words and ideas without having to repeat those nouns specifically. We also might see word pairs, common binary terms and pairs that can imply connections. So when we see one of the words, we expect to see the other one, and we will automatically assume that there's a relationship there. And finally, colons and semicolons, which can introduce summations and lists as well as imply relationships. So an example of each of these, for repetition, we might think about Barack Obama's repetition of the phrase, "Yes, we can," or Martin Luther King Jr.'s "I have a dream," both phrases that would come up multiple times within the speech in order to connect one part of the speech to another and to use them as a rhetorical device. In terms of pronoun use, we might use a demonstrative pronoun like this in order to replace an idea. In this example, we have moths and butterflies are different. This is an important distinction. In this case, the word this replaces the entire idea that moths and butterflies are different and saves us from having to repeat it. However, it also allows the reader to connect the sentence about the difference between moths and butterflies to the sentence about it being an important distinction, because the word this effectively acts as an arrow pointing at the sentence that came before and connecting them together. In terms of word pairs, we might see something like minimum and maximum used. The minimum grade to pass is 70%. The maximum is 100. When we see these types of word pairs, these are binary pairs that show opposites, we often expect to see maximum after we've seen the word minimum, and we implicitly connect them. This helps the reader, without a transition word traditionally, be able to connect the idea of the minimum grade to the maximum grade. We're going to look at colons and semicolons in a little bit more detail. However, here's a quick example of how to use a colon to transition between ideas. The study considered 3 variables: age, height, and weight. After the word 3 variables, we have the colon, which implies that we're going to get to know what those 3 variables are. Implicitly, it's connecting the earlier part of that sentence, the study considered 3 variables, with the variables themselves. The reader has an expectation that what comes after the colon is going to be in relationship to what came before. Similarly, with semicolons, we might have a sentence like this: I spent my whole paycheck. There was a sale at Sephora. In this case, we could have used a word like because, or I spent my whole paycheck as there was a sale at Sephora, to show that there's a cause and effect relationship there. However, the semicolon, showing that these two independent clauses are related, is functioning in the same way. It's implying that there's a relationship between these two sentences. So the spending of the whole paycheck is presumed to be related to the sale at Sephora. A couple of things we want to remember about the usage of colons. Colons have to always follow an independent clause, so a clause that can be a freestanding sentence on its own. For example, here's a correct use of a colon. The study looked at 3 variables, colon, height, age, and weight. We could, grammatically correctly, end our sentence after the word variables. The study looked at 3 variables. It has a subject, the study. It has a predicate, looked at 3 variables. There's a verb there. That way, we know that this is an independent clause, and we can effectively use a colon. A mistake that people often make is that they want to use a colon without having an independent clause first, which is not grammatically correct. So an incorrect sentence would be, the study looked at, height, age, and weight. We could not end the sentence after at. The study looked at. That's not a full sentence, it's not an independent clause, and therefore we cannot use a colon immediately afterwards. If we wanted to improve this sentence without using a colon, we could just simply remove it and just say the study looked at height, age, and weight. And that would be a fine option if we didn't want to use a colon. Otherwise, we'd have to introduce an ending of that sentence and say the study looked at 3 variables, as in the first example here. So always remember that a colon has to follow an independent clause. In terms of semicolons, we also have to have an independent clause before the semicolon, but unlike colons, we also need to have an independent clause after the semicolon. We also need to remember that semicolons are not to be combined with conjunctions. They replace the conjunction. So as in our Sephora example earlier, we didn't have the word because or as. We did not have a conjunction there because we have the semicolon instead to imply that relationship. So the semicolon itself is functioning as our transition there. So an example here with our Sephora example, I spent my whole paycheck, semicolon, there was a sale at Sephora. So this is correct because we have 2 independent sentences. I spent my whole paycheck, there was a sale at Sephora. Both of them have subjects and predicates, so they can both stand independently, and we've used a semicolon to show that they are related to one another, to imply that relationship and to transition from one to the other. An incorrect sentence would be, I spent my whole paycheck, semicolon, because there was a sale at Sephora. This is incorrect because we are using a conjunction that we don't need, and it also makes the second part of the sentence not an independent clause. Because there was a sale at Sephora cannot stand on its own as an independent clause, and therefore it cannot grammatically correctly be used with a semicolon. So again, the easiest way to fix this problem would be to either eliminate the semicolon and just have the word because as our transition word, or to eliminate the word because and just have the semicolon as in our correct example. So in summary, we've had 3 different transition workshops. The first one talking about the types of transitions, the adverbs, prepositions, and conjunctions. The second looking at the functions of transitions to show sequential, temporal, spatial, and logical relationships. And finally, this workshop, which looks at alternatives to transitions, such as using repetition, using pronouns, using word pairs, and using colons and semicolons in order to imply relationships between ideas. And these are alternatives that we can use in order to avoid using too many transitions so we don't become repetitive. If you do have any questions going forward, you can feel free to check out the resources on the Writing Support Blackboard page. You can also make an appointment via My Success with a Writing Support Advisor to talk over any issues that you might be having with your writing. And you can email writingsupport@uwindsor.ca or visit our website at uwindsor.ca/writing support for more information. Thanks for listening and have a great day.